one of the biggest stories of our times, and one of the times when we actually did see, frankly, talkTV, talk radio, playing a actually leading role in actually being the voice of common sense when it came to how we dealt with the COVID pandemic and lockdowns. Yesterday, we had evidence from Matt Hancock, the former health secretary, during that pandemic period, until he got sacked for having his hand on the backside of his lover and aide in the Department of Health. And at that COVID inquiry, he had a number of things to say, which amazes me, still manages to shock me. He said to the COVID inquiry that really the UK should have locked down sooner and we should lock down again. This is what he had to say about pandemic planning.
We've got to be ready to hit a pandemic hard, that we've got to be able to take action, lockdown action if necessary, that is wider, earlier, more stringent than feels comfortable at the time. And the failure to plan for that was a much bigger flaw in the strategy than the fact that it was targeted at the wrong disease.
Absolutely terrifying words. If that does not chill you to the bone, then frankly you're not paying enough attention. Someone who's definitely been paying enough attention is a journalist, talkTV's international editor, and of course the whistleblower behind the lockdown files, Isabel Oakeshott, and she joins us once again today. Good morning to you, Isabel.
Morning. I mean, there is one reason to be a little bit less terrified, and that is that I don't think anyone really takes Matt Hancock seriously anymore.
that is at least one point, isn't it, worth hearing? But I mean, I wasn't able to watch this. We were all off. Let's be honest, we were all off getting drunk all afternoon. What can I be? I've got a morning too yesterday. But I was absolutely stunned that the lesson that Matt Hancock has learned from this was that we should have been planning for lockdowns all along. We should have locked down sooner, been more strict, and then everything would be fine. I mean, there is not a shred of evidence, a shred of data from around the world or the UK that backs up anything that he had to say in that clip.
There are so many flaws with that argument. And what is so disappointing is that counsel at the inquiry didn't challenge him on that sweeping assertion. It's one of the many frustrations with the public inquiry, is that these star witnesses are allowed to make sweeping assertions on the biggest and most important matters without any challenge whatsoever from the barristers, while the barristers focus on challenging them over the minutiae, such as whether they did or didn't attend a particular meeting, you know, in search of a tiny, minute gotcha moment. Oh, you should have been at that meeting, shouldn't you? They let that all, the big things, all pass without...
It is really quite surprising. I think it's quite a frustrating watch at how little people are challenged. I mean, I know these people have submitted huge files of evidence on paper. We understand that. One of the things you were questioning yesterday was, you know, you handed over those that massive cache of WhatsApp messages to and from Matt Hancock, some of them in groups involving, you know, Prime Minister Chris Whitty, Patrick Vallance and others. But you didn't get March 2020's WhatsApps. He did not release those to you, but you're asking, well, has he actually released those to the COVID inquiry? And do we know the answer to that yet? And do we know why he didn't give you those WhatsApps?
I'm afraid we don't know those answers, and I'm going to have to pursue that more energetically, I'm afraid. I was rather hoping that I might get an easy answer during yesterday's hearing. After all, as this module of the COVID inquiry is all about pandemic planning, it would seem critical to know why the WhatsApps, which the judge has been very interested in, we know that.
There's a court case between the government and the inquiry at the current time about it.
Why that section of messages was, as far as I was concerned, missing. Now, that's March 2020, the key month when it comes to pandemic planning. And those were not shared with me, and it was very obvious to me that they had been removed deliberately from the trails of communication that were shared with me. So the question is why? Once again, disappointing that we didn't get any illumination on that matter during yesterday's hearing. I actually think the hearing was a breeze for Matt Hancock yesterday. He only had a few hours. This is his, you know, the sum total of everything that we're going to hear from him about this particular angle on pandemic planning. Nobody asked him what happens if you follow his brilliant prescription for pandemic success and just hide under the duvet for months on end. No one asked him what happens if science doesn't provide a way out.
Yes.
Because in pretty much every previous pandemic, and there have been quite a few of them over the last few decades, there hasn't been a vaccine.
Yeah.
So in a sense, we got lucky with this one. Huge resources were put into it, and it did prove effective at the critical moment. And
certainly for the elderly people who are most at risk.
Yes, not effective without caveat,
Yes.
but nonetheless, it did provide the way out that the government was looking for.
Although they didn't take it soon enough. Remember, they were going to roll it out to over 70s, and then we'd all be out of lockdown. And 4 months later, we were still in lockdown. And this is the thing. We know, we've got the real world examples. When he says, well, lockdown's the answer, and I'm amazed that we didn't look at lockdown. You know, that was a failure in our pandemic planning because we hadn't planned for lockdown. Well, China locked down very hard, very, very early. They ended up with, 2.5 years of lockdown and still got massively hit. Countries like New Zealand and Australia, they locked down pretty much, before it reached the country. And they ended up with months and months of lockdown because as soon as you come out, the virus spreads because that's what viruses do, which is why all pre-pandemic planning never planned for lockdowns, because they know you can't actually stop a virus from spreading. You can slow it down, but you can't stop it.
And that was the central reason why all the international health authorities had not recommended lockdowns until the panic of March 2020. The official advice from places like the World Health Organization is do not impose these restrictions. And as each day goes by, we see why that was very sound advice. Every day passes, we get more evidence of what a catastrophe this policy was. Unfortunately, Mr. Hancock simply isn't listening.
He really isn't. And look, he did have to run the gamut of the protesters and people outside the COVID inquiry. As we expect, bereaved families were there. They turned their backs on him as he arrived, as he left. Some shouted murderer. There was a man dressed as the Grim Reaper. He tried to confront him as he left as well. Here's what Matt Hancock had to say by way of an apology.
I am profoundly sorry for the impact that had. I'm profoundly sorry for each death that has occurred. And I also understand why, for some, it will be hard to take that apology from me. I understand that. I get it. But it is honest and heartfelt, and I'm not very good at talking about my emotions and how I feel.
Oh, really? We've heard too much about your emotions and you're falling in love, Matt. Thank you very much. But Isabel, I mean, look, I'm sure he is sorry. Look, he's not, he's not a monster. He's not, Joseph Mengele, for goodness sake. I mean, we need to get these things in perspective. But it is very, very clear that many people at the top of government, whether they're the scientific advisors, health advisors, the civil servants, the ministers, really have not learned the lessons. And this is a back-covering exercise. This is a bid to try and rehabilitate themselves in the eyes of the public and make some money. I don't know, maybe Strictly Come Dancing next for Matt Hancock. Who knows, after I'm a celebrity. And this is the concern. And it doesn't feel like this is a genuine effort to get to the truth. Because I don't know about you, I always say never forgive, never forget. But that's because I need politicians, I need people who make these decisions and the public health advisors to accept that what they did was wrong. And even if we say they did it the best initially, with the best will in the world, they have to accept it was wrong and then say they'll never do it again. But until they do that, we are going to have the risk of lockdowns again. Do we need to have that day of people actually, not retribution, but we actually say, unless you repent your sins, you need to be punished?
I mean, we're not going to get that from this inquiry, evidently. And I agree with you. And I think that you're right. Of course, Matt Hancock isn't a monster. Of course, all of it weighs heavily on him. He's paid the price of almost everything for what happened, his own misjudgments being the central feature of responsibility in that regard. Yeah. But, he is human. He will have rehearsed that apology. Yeah. You can tell that. But he had to, nonetheless, of course, he had to make that apology. My concern is that the inquiry will come out with some kind of trifling recommendations. You saw the judge asking questions about, might there be a case for a pandemic planning minister or, a special committee of this or that? I don't think we should concern ourselves with that level of micro matter.
Yeah.
I think we should concern ourselves with the big picture and whether or not we ever go down this route again, at any rate, not beyond the first few days or weeks while we work out what it is that's on, that we're facing.
Absolutely. Isabel Oakeshott, look, you've done a great service to the country by exposing those sort of WhatsApp messages in the lockdown files, and we're probably going to get more honesty and more truth in that than we're going to get from any of these inquiry interviews. Isabel Oakeshott, international editor for talkTV, thank you once again for joining us.